Mhm. We're going to start with a silent prayer. Amen. So hello, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here on this Sabbath. Today, we're going to talk about mainly the Sunday law. But we're going to look at it through an angle of what is called originalism. You have, though, to remember that even though we talk about originalism, Sunday law is our main goal here. We're trying to understand, of course, what the Sunday law is and is about. We still have some holes in our understanding of it. And we have to deal with the information we have. To help us better understand what it will look like. So I have two presentations, one today, one tomorrow. Today we'll focus more on the basis of the Sunday law and methodology. And then tomorrow we will go deeper into that understanding of originalism. It's probably not a topic that it's probably a topic that some or most of you know. Elder Preminder shared an article about originalism some time ago in the media broadcasts. And I thought when I read it through, I was thinking it's so similar to what we as a movement are going through. So before diving into that external article and the external implications of it, I was thinking we're going to go back to the internal and see its implications for us. So to start, we're going to go into the line of the priests. And this is of this, we're going to have point one, which is the internal. We will look later at the external. So in the line of the priests, I'm just going to go quickly through it because it's not my point to lay it out again. I thought that it's important for us to look at this period here. In that dispensation, we received the midnight cry. And we could give I was going to say a list, but we could give like a book full of what the midnight cry brought us. But one of the things it brought us regarding the Sunday law because we're following a thread here. This is our theme, the Sunday law. Is that was to explain to us that our understanding of how we read was wrong. Our interpretation was wrong. The way we applied the Sunday law was wrong. Why? Because our interpretation of it was wrong. We believe that the Sunday law was a Sunday law because Ellen White in 1888 said so. But God started bringing awareness to this movement of a question: how readest thou? And that's a question that is found in the Bible when the eunuch was trying to understand the Bible himself. So when he gives us that question to better understand the Sunday law, he presents to us dispensationalism. No, listen. And how it applied in different stories. We had the example of slavery, of sexism. And we had to understand that not everything was to be applied literally for us. We had to take into account to understand our time and the society we were living in, our environment, to be able to apply what we called the Sunday law. texts had to be placed in their contexts, whether it was historical, geopolitical, and religious. For us to be able to understand what they meant for us and interpret them for us. And this message obviously was not entirely accepted by everyone. And created two classes of worshippers. It's the everlasting gospel, so any message of truth is going to create those two classes anyways. And when you go back to the history of when this whole message happened, and when we were saying, okay, maybe the Sunday law is not a Sunday law after all, for me and many people, it was the last straw. They needed to leave. We were breaking not only like the foundation of the movement, but of the church, the SDA church. So you had a group that was agreeing to the message, and one who refused it. The group who accepted it accepted dispensationalism. But those who refused were saying that the Bible and spirit of prophecy, they were fixed in their meaning. And that it should not, we should not bring a new meaning to it for us. While those who accepted it said we have to adapt it and bring it in our generation. They agreed with the principle. So when we look at the response that we had in this internal situation, without even changing any of the names, of what I've written down on the board here, I could just erase this part, put external here, and everything would just fit. We're going to quickly look at the external. Because something similar is happening, the same thing. But why do we even like consider that aspect of internal external? When we look in end of 2018, beginning of 2019, this idea of the stones crying out started to develop. It started to, different names started to be used for that. Such as the newspaper prophets. And we started to understand that the tests for both groups are the same. We're both internally and externally tested by equality. Both of them are going through the same issues. Even though they might not look exactly the same, obviously. Which is why if we consider the question of how read this Tao, in the context of the Sunday law, at this time externally, it will help us better understand the Sunday law. And I'm going to explain and rephrase what I'm saying here. The Sunday law was re-explained to us, if I can put it this way, internally through dispensationalism. Which helped us understand that the Sunday law was not a law about Sunday, etc. So when we consider this Sunday law problem externally, and how this question of interpretation is applied externally, it will help us understand how the external faces the issue of the Sunday law and therefore what it is. So we know that the United States is a key power in prophecy. It's the sixth kingdom of Bible prophecy. And Revelation tells us that the states, the USA, will turn into talk like a dragon. Why and how we know? Because it's gonna kill, or it's gonna put down its main principles. And talk like a dragon, turn into a dictator. Through its legislative, judicial, and also executive branches. So we have to consider the Sunday law through that concept of USA and government. And we do find that they go through the same process. in the government of this question of interpretation. Even though we were not the ones who brought this issue to them, the Lord made it so that both of us were going through the same tests and the same tests, yeah. So before going into the external, we know that if they are and they do face this question, they're going to have a similar answer here. Two groups of worshippers. Two groups of people who will answer to that issue externally. And originalism has become more and more of an issue lately. It really, especially some of the court cases that happened recently, we were able to see what the consequences of originalism were. Of what it brought, how badly it could break down principles we thought were acquired. We will go into the details of what originalism brought for the USA through an article in the presentation tomorrow. But we can still, today we're going to look at, we're going to consider how it's affected the USA in that dispensation. Because we can see that this question, this interpretation they were asked to have, is similar. So I'm just going to repeat again here that in the external, they're supposed to interpret. Remember, we're talking about Sunday law, meaning government here. Meaning through its constitution. Which is the leading law of the land. They're supposed to understand Americans, and the government are supposed to understand America according to the time they're living in and the society they live in. If we do, if we give some examples of the internal and external, of this question, what this question brought us. We had this question of how readest thou, therefore, dispensationalism? It introduced the question of women in leadership. Here. (2014-2019). And it was supposed to teach us that what was present in the past and valid in the past was not valid if you just applied it literally to our time. We had the same issue with pants for women. And we could see it also with the different lines that were brought up of slavery and sexism. And those questions, those elements of how you read either the Bible or the Constitution, was also something we could really see under the Trump administration. Why? Well, because Trump was sexist. I think that's not something we need to prove. He was nationalistic, homophobic, and his entire program was present to show a narrowed vision of the Constitution. When you look, when you try to look for Trump and Constitution, you start to see several elements where he wants to break down the Constitution. Regarding some elements, regarding the voting elements when he was not elected president. So his understanding of the Constitution is that America is supposed to be white, because if you go back to the beginning and the foundation of the states, it was white men, white rich men, by the way. Because if you were a white man but you didn't own any land, you didn't basically have any rights. So you have this issue of white supremacy, which starts to being brought up, and you have to know on which side you stand on. Do you start including all the minorities that were either that were even neglected, or that started coming into your country? Or do you stay fixed in your meaning and you don't add any new meaning? And when those who rallied with Trump, some of them at least, ended up being radicalistic groups that upheld Trump in his misogyny. Soutenu. I think it's an I. Misogyny. I remember you write that. Yeah. So we also see that issue of sexism being brought up. When we can see how sexist he was and how he responded to some of the women that interacted with him. For example, how he talked about, among other women, about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I'm gonna read a small text. I'm gonna send it on the Zoom chat. I didn't plan to. I planned it last minute, so I'm gonna send it on the group chat for everyone. It's a quote from RGB. Just a second. She talks about that issue of interpretation and adaptation of white supremacy in America. Of how we read the definition of America. So she says, my view of the Constitution particularly is quite different. The framers were writing that Constitution at the end of the 18th century, but they were writing a document that they hoped would survive through the ages from one generation to another. I would describe my view of the Constitution as very much in line with Justice Thurgood Marshall's view when the Constitution was 200 years old. So when it was 200 years old, there were celebrations across the land, and Justice Marshall said, I celebrate not the Constitution that was published in 1787, but what the Constitution has become over 2 centuries of somewhat turbulent existence of the United States. I take my cue from the preamble to the Constitution, which reads, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union." Who were we the people in 1787? And she continues to say, "You would not be among the people." African Americans would not be among the people. Women were not there. Even white men who own no property. The genius of the United States is that over now, in the course of more than 2 centuries, the notion of we the people has become ever larger. So that the people who were once left out, like women, like African Americans, like Native Americans, are now part of we the people. I see the Constitution as striving for a more perfect union. The framers included, particularly in the Bill of Rights, some grandly general clauses like the equal protection of laws. No state shall deny to any person the equal protection of the laws. All people are entitled to due process of law. And what does the equal protection clause mean today? What did it mean in 1868? In 1868, women didn't have the right to vote until many years later, in 1920. So Ruth Ginsburg says, should I read the equal protection clause to say that it doesn't include women? They weren't thinking about the equal stature of men and women. I read those words to say that there was an idea of equality. It couldn't be achieved perfectly in their times because they were creatures of their own age. But it was an idea to grow and develop from one generation to another. So I am perfectly comfortable with saying, yes, women are part of the 14th Amendment that says no state shall deny to any person the equal protection of the laws. I think Justice Scalia would be much less comfortable recognizing that these grandly general causes have growth potential. And that and that is part of what has made our country so great, that we are ever more inclusive, respecting the dignity of people who were once forgotten, left out, even deliberately the victims of discrimination. So this quote from Ruth Bader Ginsburg explains the answer to how readest thou. Externally. And she takes the example of misogyny, and she also talks about white supremacy, because she includes African Americans, natives, etc. So she talks about basically dispensationalism. How we have to apply it according to our time, to our society. This also brings out that principle of equality versus freedom, that principle that we have seen recently in Vespers. So I thought that this quote kind of illustrates these external examples of that question, how readest thou? And the two classes between those who accept that interpretation of human rights, civil rights, compared to those who didn't accept it, such as Trump. When we see how he responds to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and yeah. So it's all about how you read. And this pattern that we were able to, that was developed over here, which was at its early beginnings, has continued to being developed and to be seen. We started to see two classes, those who how two classes of people who interpret differently the same text. Internally and externally. Internally, we've maybe been able to see it earlier than externally, because that's what we were the most focused on before. But right now we can see it even more externally in our daily lives. And by daily lives, I'm going to take into account what Elder Perminder said just before. So by daily lives, I mean prophecy and my personal life. So this is where externally, originalism comes in. It's all about interpretation. How readest thou? Originalism is a political movement or political interpretation, if you can say it that way. That has allowed many justices and many many people in court cases to throw away civil rights. And many fights that were won in the past and now have just been destroyed because of dispensation, originalism. So we will go into what originalism is and those court cases tomorrow. If you want to look at it tonight or tomorrow, you can try to look up what is originalism if you don't know already. Knowing that if you don't know what originalism is, you're not going to see it in the recent court cases. Such as, for example, the abortion ban that happened in the States. And that's where I think you can miss out on a lot of things. I do understand that we maybe don't have the time to go through the whole court cases hearings that last months and months. But when we know what to look for, and what the different key points are, such as, for example, originalism, we can see those different cases and analyze what they are, even though it's not said, okay, originalism. Because most of the justices in the Supreme Court are originalists. Have that fixed meaning of things. So even though they're not in every court case going to say, oh, because I believe in originalism, here's my conclusion. You know that their conclusion, because they're originalistic, is going to be originalist, if I can say that. So tomorrow we're going to look at the article, which is going to explain the external issue of interpretation. External. And when we will read it, I will want you to also imagine as though it was written for us internally, because it's the same thing. It's quite striking. You say, okay, that's the same arguments that those who don't accept dispensationalism give. So we're going to finish on that point today. We'll just recap a little bit. Our topic is originalism, although we haven't officially gone into originalism that deep. And our main theme, the reason why we look into originalism, is because of the Sunday law. We understood that in this dispensation here of 2014 to 2019, the Lord opened our understanding on interpretation and dispensationalism. Because we had a false idea of what the Sunday law would look like. So in the same dispensation externally, and of course for us also after that dispensation and also externally after, the external is going to face the same problem of interpretation regarding what the Sunday law will be. With two categories accepting a different interpretation of the same document. So tomorrow we're going to look at externally what is that interpretation. And how it affects the two classes. And therefore, what the Sunday law will look like. So, yeah, that's what we're going to be looking at tomorrow. I invite you to kneel down to close for prayer. Dear God, I want to thank you for your messages and how you help us better understand your truth. Lord, it's hard to understand and there's a lot of gaps in our understanding. But I pray that we can really study and watch the different elements that you put in the word for us to understand it. Lord, I pray for everyone in this camp meeting today. That you may help them and help them to also help others. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.